Welcome back to Engineer's Workshop. Got another fairly quick one for you. Just need to do a little bit of rearranging of the shop, the equipment shuffle, so to speak. Need to get access to a heavy-duty yellow transport cart, which currently is, the Skinner steam engine is sitting on that. So I'm going to move that under the beam, hoist the engine off of it, and free up the cart and the space around it for some new equipment that I got coming. So just cut to the video. To make room for what's coming, I need to have access to this yellow cart, which means I've got to take the Skinner engine and using the overhead hoist, kind of just set it on the ground out of the way so that I can shuttle my new piece of equipment from a better offloading site into the building. Past month and a half, the rains have just been making the conditions here worse and worse. I don't think I'll be able to get a huge semi-trailer into this building. No one's going to want to maneuver on this site, which isn't paved. So I'm going to shuffle this over under the beam and lift the engine off, and then I'll free up the surface of this cart to move the new equipment in. To make a little bit more room for the steam engine, I needed to move the foot of the lathe. That's the end that's right under the headstock, and the motor goes inside that. And of course, the first thing you got to do is find the balance point so that it lifts up evenly. That thing weighs probably, I don't know, 400 or 500 pounds. I can't budget at all by myself, so just use the boom pole on the tractor to scoot it over and put it beside the chip pan. This cart has a kingpin style front axle assembly. Basically the whole thing swivels back and forth. There's so much weight on it, I can't grab the tongue of the cart and pivot it from side to side at all. So to get the shackle hooked up, I was just a little bit too close to the tractor, and I'm trying to get the shackle to line up. And then, of course, I put the shackle on upside down, and that's not a good idea. So I got to pull it out, flip it over so that the pin comes in from the top. That really frees up quite a bit of area over here where this cart was. You can see I've got, this is a tower edger for taking rough sawn planks and cutting them to width. Needs a lot of restoration there. Got the compressor tank from the Westinghouse air brake compressor, a 48-inch flat belt shiv, the upper wheel for the Mershon bandsaw. Got a 36-inch 4V shiv for the Ruston Hornsby. Bunch of 3-phase motors. Got the sawmill mandrel. That's for the 48-inch blade. And the base of the Mershon resaw, still on its railroad tie timbers. Once I was approximately under the beam, the next thing to do is to try to get this thing to lift evenly. The rear end of it, which I thought was most of the weight, was over the crankshaft because of the flywheel. I had a chain going under the base, and then I figured that the crankshaft, which is like 4 inches in diameter, would keep the chain from sliding forward under the base, because I'm going to try to lift everything from a single point. The cross drawbar that I'm using with a couple of clevises spread the chains apart and the strap up front so that none of this would pull diagonally hard against the the top edge of the engine. Just inboard of the chains, there's a relatively light cover. I don't know if there's oil seals per se on the crankshaft, but these, they're like slingers. They keep the oil from dribbling down the side of the engine, and I didn't want a lot of side pressure on those. So the cross drawbar, tends to keep the chains and those side slings from bearing too much toward the center. The large square box in the lower left is the oil filtration system. That's all cast iron, fairly heavy, but there again, I didn't want too much side pressure on it. In this first attempt at lifting, what you're going to see and what I learned is that it picked up the crank end, but it didn't even begin to pick up the front end of the engine with that cylinder overhanging. And I should have really thought about it more because the center of gravity is obviously more far forward on this engine than I originally thought. So the next thing I'm going to have to do, based on this, is to lengthen the chains, which will allow the slings to become more vertical. And it'll shift the position of the cross drawbar forward on the engine. And it's just kind of trial and error at that point. Keep lengthening the chains and letting the lift point get more far forward. What I also did here, which isn't as easy to see, is the center lifting point on the cross drawbar. I don't have that shackle in the middle. I have it like one hole off towards the flywheel side because that side of the engine is heavier. And so, in fact, I think that I end up moving it even further towards the flywheel because the outboard or the edge of the engine that you're looking at is wanting to lift sooner than the flywheel side. So it's a little bit of a struggle getting things readjusted. But yeah, there I moved. Actually, what I did was I moved the chain and the sling closer to the center lifting shackle, which essentially accomplished the same thing. So this is attempt 2. Still, picking up too much on the crankshaft end of the engine, and I'm just going to keep increasing the length of the chains, which lets the center of gravity, the lifting point, progress more forward on the engine, and put more weight or more pull on the cylinder. And I want it coming up and staying relatively level.
Still heavy on this end. What you need to do is tighten up the chain on this side. I need more chain. Tighten on this side. Just a couple latches in there.
Made one last adjustment on the length of the chain, and you can see that the cross drawbar, we've moved it quite a bit forward on the engine, and I'd say the center of gravity is I'd say maybe 18 inches forward of the crankshaft, from what I can tell, and it seems to be lifting much easier now. Lifting actually more level is what I'm trying to say. And by the feel of the pull on the lifting chain, this engine is heavier than the International tractor. I mean, I know the International tractor is over 5,000 pounds, and the engine feels heavier than that just by the pull that you have to give it. And what we find later is, when we go to move the trolley sideways on the beam, there's more resistance than there was when I was moving the tractor sideways. So we have it up; it's level enough, level-ish, but we've got it up enough to pull the cribbing blocks underneath from underneath the engine and get a little bit of room to pull the engine off to the side.
I have an old lawnmower out there, international lawnmower, outside the building.
I'm finding out that the amount of force I need to pull to get the trolley to move is significant compared to when I was lifting the tractor up. So just grab the lift chains directly. And my buddy Pete is helping me pull on the strap there. Now we get it off to the side of the cart. Of course, everything's falling off as we're doing it. There was a couple of counterweights for the bandsaw that got dragged off with it. And those fell on the floor. But we get this thing off to the side. Now it's 2 feet, 2.5 feet in the air. And the first thing I want to do is get it closer to the floor. God forbid something breaks and this thing falls. I want to only have it fall a couple inches rather than 2 feet. I've seen what a big piece of equipment can do when it's dropped from 3 feet in the air, and it isn't pretty, right, Brian? With the engine out of the way, I was able to pull the cart forward, get it to the edge of the building, and that frees us up to now move the steam engine, tuck it over against the lathe as far as we can. Here's a quick shot showing the setup. We're about centered in the building. Bring it down a little bit more so that we're not so high off the floor. And now we're just going to trolley it over to the side here and park it next to the lathe. Skinner engine is still attached to the slings. I may need to shuffle this out of the way if we do back a truck in here. Now I have to go after the rest of the contents off the cart. piece that I'm lifting up off this cart is the upper slide for the Mershon resaw. It is probably 300 pounds or so, and it has like a V-gib section, and then a pivot, and then the babbited journal blocks for the upper shaft that allow this thing to adjust up and down for the length of the blade. It allows for a pivot for tracking the upper blade relative to the to the lower blade, and then it has provision for tensioning the upper blade by hanging a very heavy weight on a knife edge pivot that puts an upward pressure on the entire journal block assembly and puts the tension in the blade. Unlike a spring tension, this tension is constant. So I guess as the blade would heat up and change its length, the tension in the blade would remain constant because it's a truly like a balance weight that gives it that upward force. Just like a kid with a new toy, I couldn't resist tweaking the balance point to get it a little bit more level, and then wheeling it over to the center of the building to show how nice and freely everything turns. The shiv must have a thrust bearing on the hook because you can spin your load around, and it just travels so nice and smoothly. Wish I had a crane scale. Got one at work, and I might try to sign that thing out, and so I can put it in between the hook and see what the exact weight on the engine is. It would be nice to know that, that I'm not exceeding the capacity of the crane too much. You can see the trolley kind of moves in little fits and starts when you're working with a load this heavy. Still really can't complain. It's you could push it by hand, and I don't need to have a tow rope up on the trolley itself. So real pleased with this setup. I think I'll park it back on its cribbing now and call it a day.